Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are making the merger this week between WNST and Baltimore Positive. You want to be following that. We'll be talking about it out on Twitter and Facebook and all those places, as well as on our social media. Luke Jones is going to be out in Owings Mills all week long, passing Royal Farms, getting coffee back and forth to Skype and Zoom and wave from the field to folks. And Luke, I guess this is where I'm going to rely on you here. We talked about all the unlikely parts of this and COVID, but there's going to be a football game they're going to play. And I think for folks that haven't been out and you've seen practice, or maybe you're just following along in some sort of passive way, that at 1 o'clock on Sunday, who are the players? Who are we playing? What's going on? Who are these Browns? What's at stake? It's certainly over the hill. Houston next week, and I'll be on that trip, and then Kansas City back in here. This is sort of a straight out of the chute. We're going to find out if this team's 3-0 3 weeks from now. We're really on to something. If they're not 2-1, we're going to wonder what the hell went wrong, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you're talking about a team that's 14-2. You're talking about a team that has a boatload of continuity, which you want anyway, let alone in a year where you're trying to play in the midst of the challenges of the pandemic and the uncertainty there. But the expectations are through the roof, and they should be. I think it would have been difficult to envision too many scenarios where they wouldn't have been at this point, short of the unspeakable injury to Lamar Jackson. I mean, that's the only thing that could happen where there wouldn't be these high expectations. But now we're here. We're at the point where this season is going to kick off. We can certainly talk about challenges that could present themselves at some point, but they're going to kick off on Sunday. And the expectations for the Ravens are as high as any team in the league. I think you've seen it with Super Bowl predictions. I've seen just as many, if not more, predictions for the Ravens to make and win the Super Bowl as Kansas City, who, of course, would be trying to repeat. But I think for me, I mean, obviously, I've been out at training camp the last few weeks, but Saturday, having final cutdown day, a 53-man roster, a practice squad, an expanded 16-man practice squad this year formulated on Sunday, that's when it feels real. And now we know what at least the initial 53 is going to look like. And to your point, for those who maybe weren't paying as close attention, the good news is you don't have a whole lot to learn because – for the most part, you have a roster that's returning. There's a couple exceptions. Of course, Marshall Yanda being retired. So right guard has been a major topic of discussion. I think we thought for most of the spring and summer, it could be DJ Fluker. It still might, but Tyree Phillips, the rookie third-round pick, really came on at the end of training camp. So I'm wondering if it's going to be him. And then on the defensive side, we talked at length about Earl Thomas. We know about that. I think even if you weren't paying that close attention to training camp, you certainly know how that played out. But you look at the defensive line. Calais Campbell, biggest outside acquisition of the offseason. Derek Wolfe, someone that the Ravens flirted with way back when in the pre-draft process, back in, I guess it was 2012. And he's someone who won a Super Bowl with Denver. So, they added some plus 30 veterans, which, you take a little bit of pause on the defensive line with that, but clearly some guys that they identified as a way to upgrade this defensive line in terms of a little bit more pass rush. And also, and we talked about this a lot with what happened against Tennessee, to really improve that defensive front against the run. So, those are kind of the obvious spots. And yeah, there's some depth spots, and, Patrick Queen at inside linebacker, for example, and, but you really look at that right guard position and you look at just how different this defensive line looks. And, those are the things that jump out. But as I mentioned, a lot of this team looks similar to last year, which they went 14-2. That's a good thing.
Excuse me, Luke Jones. I got to put my mic up. Luke Jones, too much coffee. I'm drinking out of my Cole Roofing mug. I got my Rofo coffee here. I'm trying to get started. Late start because of Labor Day and all that this week, kind of a condensed week a little bit. But John has managed to, do this pretty successfully over a dozen years, right? And packing these days in and bringing the team together, and we got to stick together, and we can't get COVID. I see this as sort of John's strength. Now that we're actually going to have a season and we're getting into this, and they've gotten a little bit of a handle on how to keep these guys clean for the time being and what this is all about, I am bullish on how good the Ravens will be at this, at managing this, at managing heads, at keeping people in the building, at getting them fed and loving them up and getting that family vibe, and we're all going to love each other. We're all, all those things I wrote about in Purple Rain too, right? This is when it gets dangerous for the rest of the league because the Ravens are good at this, and I will be bullyish about this in saying, yeah, the Ravens are going to shut this down and circle the wagons because of the personalities in there. I think that alone, for whatever is going on in Berea right now, whoever's in the hot tub, whoever's got a playbook, whoever's worried about their car or their family or where they are or how they're getting to Baltimore or where their plane's going to go and where their tests are, the Ravens are going to be better at this, and I think that's going to show up on Sunday, and I think that shows up right away. I mean, if the Cleveland Browns are getting on a plane and flying out here to play football this week, I'm gonna gather to say that the Ravens are going to be better than them this week. I fully expect the Ravens to win a football game like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, especially when you consider Kevin Stefanski being a brand new head coach who, and yeah, you could look at it from the standpoint of the Ravens haven't seen what the Browns offense is going to look like.
Is that with an F or a PH? I'm just.
but it's definitely, there's some novelty to it. There's some unknown on the Ravens side, but as I wrote late last week at WNST.net, yes, the Browns have faced Lamar Jackson multiple times now, but imagine this, Nestor. We've talked about this. Very little live hitting in training camp, no preseason games whatsoever, brand new coaching staff, some player turnover. How would you like to be the Cleveland defense when maybe the young guys went live, and maybe the Browns did a little more live tackling than the Ravens did. The Ravens did it with some of their young guys. Again, it was very minimal. How would you like to be in a fully live setting, playing a game that counts for the first time since last season, and Lamar Jackson is on the other side? I mean, just think about that. Let that marinate for a moment, that they haven't faced any quarterback in a live setting since last December, and now their first test is going to be against Lamar Jackson. So I agree with you on that point.
3 downs, 10 yards. Blow the whistle. Let's play.
I'll put my first official prediction out later this week, as I always do, my 5 predictions for Sunday. But I certainly don't anticipate that being a major problem. You never know. It's week 1. I'm not saying they're just going to roll the ball out and they win by 40. I think that would be a little too cavalier, but certainly have high expectations there. But again, you just look at the continuity here compared to all these teams that have new quarterbacks, whether you're talking about a Phillip Rivers in Indianapolis or Tom Brady even in Tampa Bay, as much as the Buccaneers have really gotten a lot of hype. And I get it. I see their roster, including a defense that quietly got better as last season went on. So I'll totally buy into the Buccaneers being a good team maybe come November and December. I'm not convinced they're going to be as good as they're capable of being in September. And that, to your point, is where I think the Ravens and some of these other teams, like a Kansas City, of course, like some of these other teams that have been successful the last few years and didn't have their coordinators poached or didn't have too many players leaving free agency, have the same head coach. Those are, to me, those are going to be the teams that thrive early in the season. And that's not to say they won't have some hiccups, but they're going to be the teams that make fewer mistakes than the teams that have a new offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator or a new head coach or a new quarterback or have replaced 3/5 of their offensive line. I mean, the Ravens have a couple questions, but I look at their questions relative to other teams in the league, even other teams that fancy themselves as being good in 2020, and it just pales in comparison. And I think final cutdown day on Saturday really illuminated that. I mean, I had thought about it for a while, but where was most of the discussion as far as Ravens final cuts? Who their number 3 quarterback was going to be, whether they were going to keep a 3rd tight end, whether they were going to keep a 9th or 10th offensive lineman, whether they were going to keep a 5th inside linebacker. It wasn't these position battles where, I mean, you can think back a few years back. where I would talk about cornerback, and Asa Jackson was their number 3 corner, and Shockey Brown was their number 4 corner, and good luck figuring out a 5th or a 6th guy. This year,
who was the guy from San Francisco that Ozzie signed like in week 2 that couldn't play? That they gave money to.
I'm trying.
Remember him?
Talking about Sharice Wright?
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I lose the name.
Well, his first game was against San Francisco. I mean, they signed him off the street. But my point is, some of those position battles that we were talking about, some of those roster competitions.
But signing guys off the street doesn't feel like something they're going to have to do 2 weeks from now. I guess is what I'm saying.
You would hope not. I mean, you would hope not. You never know. But the point I was trying to make about corner, for example, the Ravens have 5 corners on this roster, which, is a pretty typical amount. Some years they've kept more. Some years they've kept maybe 4. But the guys that they cut, which were Terrell Bonds, Khalil Dorsey, and Josh Nurse, 3 guys who were long shots all along. Nestor, those guys competed in camp. I think those 3 guys have a chance to be NFL caliber corners. And by the way, the Ravens re-signed 2 of them to their practice squad. My point is, you look at the depth, you look at the stability of this roster overall, and yeah, they got to figure out right guard. Yeah, there's some unknown about Deshaun Elliott, although coaches and players are there's confidence in that young man. There really is. But there are questions relative to other teams, even other contenders. It's not a whole lot. I mean, and you never know. You can really go down a slippery slope if you just assume because it happened last year, it's automatically going to happen the same way this year. I don't expect the Ravens to break records again necessarily with their offense. But that said, that doesn't mean that I think there's going to be this precipitous big-time drop-off either. I think you'll see a little bit of statistical regression just because, I don't think Lamar Jackson's going to – I don't think he's going to run for 1,300 yards this year. I don't think he probably won't run for 12, but he might run for 11, and that's not going to surprise me.
But I'm fascinated to see how many times he's going to choose to pass the football on Sunday. Sure.
Right, and that's the thing. They're going to evolve as much as that's what's so funny. I've done a couple out of market.
Me too, and I know what you're going to say. And they all want to talk about Lamar passing. I'm like, they were winning by 30 points every week in the third quarter. Like, what do you want them to do? You know?
And the difference there, and this is what I keep telling people is, yes, when you look at it from a volume standpoint, from a counting number standpoint, yeah, he threw far fewer passes than most starting quarterbacks in this league. But look at the efficiency. Look at the percentage of his attempts that were touchdown passes. Look at their success rate when they threw the football. Yeah, there are questions about this team that were exposed in the Tennessee playoff loss. If they come into a position where they're down a couple scores, can they throw the ball and come back? But guess what? That's a question about everyone. And for what Kansas City did in the playoffs, which was incredible, and I give Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes all the credit in the world, no one's blueprint is to fall behind by 2 touchdowns. Generally, your win probability is going to crash and burn when you're down 2 touchdowns in a game. So that's not, it's not as though they want to deliberately try to do that or anything like that. Yeah, they got to figure out how to play off schedule a little bit more. And you hope with Marquise Brown being a year older, Miles Boykin being a year older, throwing Devin Duvernay with his speed and some of his ability with yards after the catch, J.K. Dobbins, who I think has some ability as a receiver out of the backfield that he really showed, that the Ravens haven't really had that element to their running back group since Ray Rice.
Yeah, right. Sure.
So some of those factors playing into it, that doesn't mean they're going to suddenly become the team that throws the ball more than anyone else, but that efficiency quotient that was so good last year, that's where you have a better chance to continue that. I mean, everyone asks, like, are teams going to figure out Lamar Jackson? Do I think teams are going to come up with ways to play him a little more effectively from time to time? Yeah, in the same way that Tom Brady didn't go 16-0 and win the Super Bowl every single year, but no one figured him out. Peyton Manning, no one figured him out. Like, go down the list.
Well, there is no figuring them out because they had other clubs in their bag. They had other ways to do it. Maybe not at the end for Peyton Manning or John Elway, but, there were other ways for them to play the game. And part of that's coaching, right? I mean, Belichick would enter every fight left-handed, and you'd say, why is he playing left-handed? Because he can hit left-handed, and that's the way that the modern football really evolved in trying to defeat guys that are smarter than you, better than you, and have more talent than you, right?
Right, and that's what the Ravens are going to be chasing this year. Now, do I expect Lamar Jackson to make a similar leap from year 2 to year 3 that he did from his rookie year to last year? Probably not, because that was a historic kind of leap. I'm guessing his improvement this year will be a little more incremental, a little more modest. But if he continues to do that over the course of time and assume he stays healthy, which is the same question for everyone else. Tom Brady tore up his knee standing in the pocket. Joe Flacco had his knee torn up standing in the pocket. So it's not just about running the ball less. It's just staying healthy in general. And some guys have an ability to do that, and other guys are kind of snake bitten in that way. But if Lamar Jackson continues to make just incremental improvement year after year, he is such a unique, special talent that there's not going to be any, quote, figuring him out. Some teams will have some best practices, but it's still going to be Lamar Jackson out there. And I can remember talking to Josh Bynes last year when we had him out for a live show, talking to him just off to the side about it. And he said, no one's going to figure him out because Lamar Jackson doesn't grow on trees. He is such a unique individual in that way. And we've talked about this before. It's like playing Navy, and maybe that's not a great example after what happened to the Mids this week, but it's such a unique challenge that it's not as though you're tearing up your entire roster just to try to beat what is, let's face it, a novelty offense compared to the rest of the league. I don't mean that as a knock. It's great if
Didn't
you
Joe
have
Flacco
that.
call it that once? Or
Well, but when you do it so well, who cares if it's a novelty? Novelty is better than conventional, which means boring, which means everyone's figured out how to stop it.
Well, this is the fascinating part of the Cleveland Browns this week, right? Like, I'm going to be out talking to Michael Regai and Daryl Ryder, and you can find all of that stuff up in the BuyAToyota.com podcast audio vault as we merge Baltimore Positive and WNST.net together. But I'm going to be talking to these folks from out of town. Next week, it'll be Houston. John McClain, Aaron Wilson covered all those people in Houston. They're all like, all right, so now we're a year further along, and you're going to get them on the phone and say, well, what are their chances of stopping them? And it's really going to be about, well, let's talk to you about their safeties and their linebackers. Talk to you about gap responsibilities on their interior line and how they're going to match up and flow to the football. And I'll tell you whether maybe they're going to be able to play, because if they don't have a back seven that can run, and that really is responsible in some way and gap control, they're gonna look foolish like the Bengals did, like everybody did last year, chasing them around, right?
Yeah, I mean, really.
And you can look good 94% of the time. The 5 plays that you don't look good, you're gonna get embarrassed.
That could be all over, right? I mean, this goes back to his rookie year, the playoff game, right? I mean, the Chargers. Remember, they famously played 7 defensive backs, and everyone said, "Oh, that's the blueprint.
That's it, right? Yeah.
That's it." And it's not that simple. Look, elements of what they did, and Tennessee did a really nice job with.
But I think the Chargers thing is the baseline, though. I think that if you're going trigonometry, that's algebra 1. I mean, you better do that. You better have a lot of guys. I guess the other part of it is you better have 17 football players, not 13, because you're going to get winded, you're going to get gassed, and you better have depth, right?
But the thing with that is, do you have a Derwin James among that group of 7? Do you have a Bosa and an Ingram coming off the edges, or really?
Well, to your point, it's confusion too. One play, Ricard comes out of the backfield a different way than what you saw on tape. Somebody gets caught flat-footed, and Lamar runs by him, right? Like we saw that happen. We didn't see it on every play. We saw it happen against every team multiple times to really piss off the other team's defensive coordinator, to say, "Oh, I thought you had inside, you had outside." I don't. That's different when in week 12, I think, if you've been playing it the same way all year. To your point, everyone has to learn a new playbook this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so much different. I mean, we didn't talk about it a ton because everyone focuses on Tennessee, and obviously Cleveland did a nice job in week 4. Remember the Buffalo Bills game? Buffalo's defense did a really nice job for large chunks of that game.
And frustrated. It was the one time before Tennessee came in that we saw a really frustrated offense,
it was one of those teams that did a nice job of crowding the box and playing discipline. They had enough talent. And you make Lamar throw outside the numbers, which he can do, but that's not his strength. It's a relative weakness because he still made a lot of throws in that area.
I think he's good at doing that on his terms.
Sure.
I think when it's 3rd and 18, And you know,
And
in the
that's
fourth
most
quarter, and you're
quarterbacks.
losing by 10 points, which we're not much. It's a
Right.
different circumstance then, right?
But that's most quarterbacks. But the point I was making about Buffalo, the long touchdown pass to Hayden Hurst. Think about how that one play, to your point, where you can play 95% excellent football, but
Break
if
the
you let
code.
your guard down on that 5%, it's Lamar taking off, or he's hitting one of his tight ends streaking down the field for a touchdown. I mean, that's just where it is. And we've talked about this for years when the Ravens would go up against Tom Brady and the Patriots when that offense was at its highest level. We certainly talked about that with Peyton Manning, with Indianapolis and then Denver. You just have such a small margin for error against offenses like that. So, again, the point with the Ravens, do teams have some best practices now of what they can try to do? Sure, but you better have A, scheme, B, discipline, C, enough talent to execute that scheme to try to slow this offense down. And even when you do those things, you're not shutting these guys out. You're getting a few stops, and that was always the formula for the Ravens against Indy or New England back in the day. Get enough stops to give yourself a chance that you score 28 or score 31. You've got a really good chance to win then. I mean, that's how teams have to approach the Ravens. Same thing with Kansas City when teams go up against the Chiefs. I mean, that's what you're dealing with here. But everything I just said, that's also assuming Greg Roman and Lamar Jackson are remaining stagnant. They're the same as they were last year. And that evolution, as John Harbaugh famously called it last year, the revolution, they're continuing to tweak and trying to fine-tune and evolve. And I think you're going to see more of that. Do I think the Ravens are suddenly going to throw the ball a ton? No, of course not. They didn't draft J.K. Dobbins in the second round for them to suddenly become this wide-open passing game. They're going to continue to run the ball, and Lamar Jackson's the center of that universe. Everything they do, passing or throwing, or passing or running, is all anchored by what he does. But do I think they are going to mix in a few more throws? Sure. Do I think some of the play action might look a little bit different, or maybe they lean even more in the play action? Yeah, why not? When you just had a record-setting rushing attack. So they're all trying to chase the Ravens at this point in terms of these defenses trying to figure out the best ways to slow this thing down. But that's where the Ravens are evolving, and that's where I go back to the continuity. I mean, if Greg Roman had taken a coaching job somewhere else, not that the expectations wouldn't be high, that would be a hell of a lot bigger question right now as far as whoever their new OC would be, trying to take what you did last year and not just maintain it, but to evolve and grow. When you keep that coaching staff in place the way they did across the board, it just, it opens up the possibilities that they can be even better, even if statistically it's not going to be better, just profile-wise, evolving and making things that much more problematic. And that's where, again, you could keep talking about trying to stop Lamar Jackson, but easier said than done. And I think the Cleveland Browns will be reminded of that on Sunday afternoon.
If you are preparing for Ravens football this week, I want to remind everybody, Royal Farms, one of our longest-standing sponsors, got chicken boxes everywhere, deals everywhere to make sure you don't have to, get out the grill this weekend if you don't want to. You can go fried chicken, go old school. Our friends at Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Also, our friends at Planet Fitness, open for business, socially distancing, doing all the safe stuff so you can get your workout or work in. Learn more at planetfitness.com. Stop by and see them. And I'm wearing my Sporticulture hat right now from Court. I'm going to get Court on the program and talk about all the beautiful flowers. We're going to get some flowers on the set here as well that my cat can come in and eat. But this is the Magma lamp, and it's new. It's purple on the base, black in the Magma. It's got kind of a cool glow, too. And I got the other one. Maybe I'll set the other one up over next to my leg lamp here next week. If we maybe every week I'll get one, and we'll be like 15 and 1. It'll look like a candelabra in here by Christmas time. But you can go to sporticulture.com and learn more. It's up on the hat. And, of course, we're merging WNST.net along with Baltimore Positive. You're going to see a completely new and unique web experience at Baltimore Positive in the coming days as we put the merger together. Luke's going to have his own space. WNST Sports will all be powered up by Baltimore Positive, the new brand around here. So I got the new hat. And we have a new logo, too, with the crab. You haven't seen the new crab logo. We have to check that out, Luke. Speaking of crabs, our friends at Costas are there with cream of crab soup with crabs. You can curbside, order them up. They're over there ready to take care of you. Costas has been doing this as long as I've been doing it. They've been sponsoring us the entire century now, going back to the night that Bryant McKinney was there with my mom and Super Bowl Eve and all that stuff. And the weirdness of not playing football this week, Luke, is and this is going to be the weirdness of watching this team. I said earlier 3 downs, 10 yards. I really screwed that up because with this team it's 4 downs and 10 yards, that they play the game differently than anyone else. And I don't think it'll take long if we're in 4th and 2 from our own 42 on the second set of downs to see Lamar run right, see Lamar run left, and go for it on 4th down. That was probably the weirdest part of all of this last year, is that they literally played the game differently than any of us had ever seen it played.
Well, they play it intelligently. Football analytics people like Aaron Schatz at Football Outsiders would tell you that's what you should always be doing. But coaches are so risk averse. Coaches are so deathly afraid of being the one to make the mistake. It's way easier to kick the field goal or to punt than it is to go for it on 4th and 1, like what happened to the Ravens twice in the playoff game. It bit them at the wrong time, but their process and their decision-making, I hope John Harbaugh doesn't shy away from that. I don't think he will. But from a game theory standpoint, that's what you should do. And why not?
And you're not going to hear the rise of the crowd the way you always do, right?
Oh, sure, right, right.
All of that stuff that I'm telling you, man, and I know it goes, but we talked at length about it, but that 4th down where it's frenetic and the crowd senses the frenetic part of it and defensive coordinators frenetic, that part of it, the home advantage of screwing the other team when Lamar's doing it and all of us shutting up, and vice versa when next week it's Deshaun Watson or 2 weeks from now it's Patrick Mahomes operating in our stadium with complete immunity.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's going to be we're going to be talking about that on Monday. We're going to be talking about how there really is no home any advantage anymore and how much it's going to affect 4th down and those.
Sure.
You talked about Justin Tucker kicking field goals and without noise. All of that is going to pulsate in our senses a little differently. And I think you and I, who I think it's going to be weird, I'm going to be like, I'm not going to be able to bother you during the game. Oh man, I'm not going to be able to distract.
Well, you always say how quiet I am during a game anyway. So, but no, it's different. I mean, it really is. When you think about how many elements of football, you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I was really trying to think of any other setting. And look, I'm not talking about college basketball with Cameron Indoor Stadium, just professional sports settings. I think of baseball, I think of hockey, I think of basketball compared to the NFL, where you think of pre-snap penalties, you think of delay of game penalties, crowd noise. Not that the other sports aren't impacted by crowd noise in some way, but I feel like football has elements built into it.
Football eats on it.
Yeah, right. So it is going to be different in that way.
Football eats on it when you're playing a Susquehannock, and when Loch Raven's playing at the foot of the WNST tower, you can hear what 3rd down sounds like when there's 200 people on the sideline.
Sure. So that's not to say that home field advantage has disappeared, because I do think the travel element and the fact that these teams are going to be essentially quarantining in their hotel, I think home field advantage is different this year. That's for sure. I don't think it's non-existent, but it's certainly reimagined as far as what you really look at. And to be honest, I've actually seen some studies in recent years that have even argued that maybe home field advantage isn't quite as drastic as it used to be, and some of the numbers even bearing that out, which, I mean, you're talking about a sample of a few years compared to going way back when. And I think a lot of it's difficult to quantify anyway, but yeah, just the simple fact of a 3rd down when you're on the road, normally, that crowd is hell for you trying to get the play. Those are tough
yards.
Yeah. I mean, you're trying to use a silent count. And I can think for years, Marshall Yonda always, looking back and then grabbing the center's hand to know, hey, that's our silent count. Go snap the ball. You're not going to have to do that. I mean, now it's going to be the standard 70 decibel pre-recorded noise, I suppose. I think that's what they're going to do. It sounds like that's what they're going to do. Or in the select markets right now where they can have some fans, look, if you're having 5,000 fans at your game, great, good for those people, but they're not making the same amount of noise as 70,000. So It's definitely going to be different in that way. And I think what's interesting, and Greg Roman was asked this, I guess it was last week or the week before, was asked about the fact that on the road, it's not going to be loud. So do you even have to be careful from the opposite standpoint as far as where you huddle, how loud you are in the huddle calling the play, because they might be able to hear it compared to normal circumstances. So it's very different. It's weird. I'm not going to try to normalize any of this that's going on, but I think it still has the potential to be fun. And certainly this is going to be a season we're never going to forget. That much is sure. Whether the Ravens go 16-0 and win the Super Bowl, or whether, God forbid, there's a rash of injuries and they go 7-9 and they don't live up to expectations, this year is different. And I think going back to our previous conversation, you can lament the things that we don't have right now, or try to put a positive spin on it and say, hey, watching the Ravens with an empty stadium is better than not watching the Ravens at all. And when you are talking about this being a contending team the way it is, I mean, yeah, it's going to stink that there aren't any fans. There's no question, but it still has the potential to be a whole lot of fun.
All right, we're going to be watching. We're going to be monitoring. Luke's going to be on the fields in Owings Mills. We're going to be talking about our sponsors and merging a website at Baltimore Positive and WNST.net. It is our 24th, 5th? How many seasons? 5 now? 25?
25.
Wow.
In fact, that's why I did my top 25 regular season moments back in the spring.
Well, I've been putting together WNST Classic, and I have been adding different components to all this. And the September 1st date of the Vinny Ray Lewis game, and all that kind of came and went last week. And I put some pictures up of the Dump Trumpy signs.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, look what I found. You ready? You ready?
There you go.
I found the stash of the Dump Trumpy signs and the Get Nasty signs. And you want me to read from some history here? Let's see here. I despise the whole concept of the Baltimore Ravens. I see nothing but doom and gloom for this franchise. I wish the Ravens high winds and muddy fields. I wish them empty roads to and from the ballpark. I wish them cold hot dogs.
You know what's funny?
I wish them nothing but bad.
It's so funny. I can recall, because now he was obviously on commentary that day for NBC, but he actually, that was in a football preview magazine. I can't remember if it was
Sport
Lindy.
magazine.
Yeah, it was one of those. But I remember where I was, Nestor. This is Luke Jones shy of his 13th birthday. I turned 13 a month after the Ravens played their first game. October 2nd, 1996, I turned 13. I can recall I was at the beach on the boardwalk at Wildwood. There was a bookstore. Imagine that. You don't see very many of those anymore. But with all the football magazines, and I was excited, 12-year-old, finally had a local team after rooting for the 49ers and Kansas City, Joe Montana.
And we were getting picked for 5th place in a 5-team division.
No
right?
question, no question about
place.
it. No, it was 5 then, and then Cleveland made it 6 for 2 years before they realigned. But I can recall reading that, and I was just thinking, wow, Bob Trumpy doesn't like the Ravens at all. It's so funny that something like that. I remember where I was reading that, and then of course I think he did the game with Tom Hammond that day. Doing the game, and Bob Trumpy said some nice things about Baltimore that day.
Bob Costas came and did a drive-by too.
So that's the one that made me mad more so than Trumpy. But whatever. It's so funny to think back to that, and I can remember I wasn't there that day, but I remember sitting in my parents' living room and having our own team. My dad had, talked about the Colts. My grandparents had talked about the Colts, and it's crazy to think we're now 25 seasons now about to kick off. 24 years. It's wild. It's so weird to think now, guys like Lamar Jackson and so many of the rookie class, these guys weren't even born yet when the Ravens kicked off their first game. Just think about that. That's really weird and really speaks to how old we're all getting, right?
I was just happy to go back and forth with Amy Trask on Twitter on the anniversary and share the picture of me holding the AFC Championship trophy in the black hole. So, there'll always be that, at least, on the other side of the Raiders thing. But here come the Cleveland Browns. And all I'll say, as we wrap this segment, and we're going to talk more football all week with lots of people from Cleveland. You're going to hear Michael Regai here, Kevin Burns stopping by, Femi Abedejo is going to preview it. We're going to go out to Cleveland, talk to Munch Bishop, amongst others. I would just say for the Cleveland Browns, a year ago today, they were the Super Bowl champions. Remember that?
Well, I mean, not everyone was buying into that, but a lot of people were. And look, they still have talent. I mean, the Ravens have to come out and play a good football game. I mean, they can't just roll the ball out. And we saw what happened week 4 last year. They got embarrassed in their home building. But despite Cleveland's talent, how is that all going to come together? It certainly didn't come together under Freddie Kitchens. We'll see if Kevin Stefanski has more success. I'm guessing it's not going to come together in week 1. And perhaps that team is much better when you see them as the season goes on. They do have an easier schedule than they had last year on paper, although going from 2019 to 2020, who knows? COVID outbreaks, injuries. I mean, there's so many different things to think about in that way. But yeah, they're a talented team, but they were the flavor of the month last year at this time, whereas the Ravens, I think people thought the Ravens had a chance to be good, but there was so much unknown and doubts about Lamar and this.
Man, if only the Ravens would have signed Antonio Brown in this
offseason,
right? and Clowney, man, they really would have had a chance. Yeah, I mean, that's the common thought is you sign the big name, and I mean, that's the Dan Snyder method, right?
That's true, but how about the Clowney story? I mean, the fact that there was so much talk about New Orleans being the team that would work out the sign and trade to be able to land them. Here, the Ravens, they had something worked out, I guess, in principle with Jacksonville if the NFL had allowed such a thing. But, you know, the idea of trading cash and, you know, the league didn't approve it. But that was the way. I mean, the Ravens, you know, their cap would have been really tight trying to fit Jadeveon Clowney in there. But they were trying. And that's interesting because, you know, checking in with people at various times, even going back to last year, you heard some split opinions on Clowney. You know, some people absolutely love him. Some people thought good player, but not the guy we want to invest lucrative money in. But
how much money are they paying Judon this year?
Judon, it's what, $16.08
well,
million?
I mean, he better go out and be what Clowney was supposed to be at that price, right? Like, you know,
that's fair. And look, you never know. When you make the decision to tag a player, you don't know who's going to hit the market.
Well, one's a healthy guy and one's not a healthy guy, right? Like, I mean, we could say whatever we want about Clowney, but you're never getting that guy that popped in April 5 years ago that everybody got crazy about, right?
Well, I mean, I still think he's a hell of a player, but to your point, did have microfracture surgery earlier in his career, and we saw what happened to Peter Boulware. I mean, that essentially ended his career overnight. He came back.
By the way, Peter Boulware owns Peter Boulware Toyota. So there's a plug.
There you go.
If you see Jay Pivot, give him some love for me and all of our friends at Toyota. But Peter opened his own Toyota dealership about 3 weeks ago. So, yeah, that's what he's doing with his life.
But he would tell you that his career got shortened from that same surgery. That's
why he's selling Toyotas now instead of
that clown
Hall of Fame
that he had a few years back. Which, hey, he don't just look at the sack numbers last year. He was really good last year, but how long is that career? Is that a guy you're going to invest long term? I mean, who knows how it would have played out.
But you can only have so many of that guy. You only have so many $16 million
Well,
players,
especially now because the Ravens are going to have to pay their own guys that much.
A lot of their guys. And I don't even know who they really covet and who they don't. I mean, you and I have thrown around the Stanley, Marlon Humphrey, Lamar, Mark Andrews, Zeus. I mean, they're going to pay all these guys top of class, right?
Well, and they're not going to be able to pay all of them. They're going to be able to pay I think they'll be able to pay most of them.
And what if Patrick Queen turns out to be Ray Lewis, right?
Well,
so you got that going.
Well, you deal with that 5 years from now because he's a rookie. So that'll be. But that's why you need to hit on.
Well, they've already got a Matt Judon problem. I guess is where this whole thing started, right?
But that's why you got to hit on a Patrick Queen. That's why J.K. Dobbins needs to be the replacement full time for Mark Ingram next year. You can move on from Ingram, save some money. I mean, it's an evolving process year after year. The most successful teams, they've got expensive players, but they're rolling in that talent year after year, that cheap, controllable talent. And then that affords you the ability to make a difficult decision, whether it's Matt Judon, whoever it might be. We've seen the Ravens let some good football players go in the past. You get those comp picks and you're right back at it. It's a heck of a cycle, but the best teams are able to do it. And then you can sustain success over time.
All right. You know what, man? I may bring one of the signs to the game with me this week.
Why not?
Just to, old school it a little
24
bit.
years later.
I got a big stack of them. I brought about a dozen of them home because some people asked me for them. So if anybody sees this and you really want a dump Trumpy sign, legitimate. I mean, these are mint condition. Let me give you an aside story because this is a civic story here about the city. I remember bringing all these boxes. These are really thick stock. They're really heavy signs back in the day. Junior Press, by the way, anybody out there sees any of our friends from Junior Press, tell them we said hello. And we had big boxes, and they bowed the wheels of the nasty van because it was so heavy, in the back out of Memorial Stadium. And we took the boxes and we flared them, first base, third base. I'm thinking like 33rd Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
And before I know, I go back, and my son was on with Jane Miller doing Channel 11 News. We have a video of him. He was 11 years old. My dad's a dumb Trumpy, and he sucks. Like the whole thing went on. So I have a video of that, too. I have shared that on Barry's birthday to embarrass him. That's the 22nd, so you want to go on to Barry's Facebook for that. But then somebody came to me, and they're like, hey, man, some of the kids have picked up the boxes of signs, and they carried them a block up, a block west on 33rd, and they're selling them for $1 a piece. So kids were selling my Dump Trumpy signs for $1 a piece that day. And if anybody has any stories on that, nasty at WNST.net. The sad part is 24 years later now, I think of how many people still aren't with us anymore, you know what I mean, that don't remember that story because they're not with us. It's 24 years, a long, long time. And we lost Greg Montgomery last week, and I haven't had a chance to properly grieve Greg, who was in my phone and had some mental health issues, along life's journey. And Matt Stover was close with Greg as well, and a lot of us are that era, and Steve Everett. So I send out my thoughts to everybody in New Jersey that lost Greg Montgomery. He was in my studio. He would call me when he came to town, Luke. He would stop by the studio. He would literally just crash the studio and sit down. And I got to find a couple of those tapes because that happened a lot. He was a special personality, man. He was a Houston Oiler. So he was the guy I was most attracted to. When the team came to Baltimore, the first guy I wanted to talk to was Greg Montgomery.
Yeah, he was an all-pro with Houston, yeah.
And he had done a bumper. I have to go find this. He did a Houston Oilers bumper for me in the locker room of the Pontiac Silverdome. And my buddies and I all drove out to Detroit to see Tiger Stadium summer of '92. So there was no football. There was no thought of football. By the way, I found my press pass from the Dolphins-Saints game. So I'm going to put a picture of that. I found that one. But Greg Montgomery did a bumper for me back in the day. I'm going to re-release my Bill Murray bumper too, and my Peter Angelos bumper. I'm going to put all that out on the new website so you can have fun. This is Peter Angelos. You're listening to Nasty Nestor Aparicio. All right, Luke. We'll talk baseball later because football is more important than baseball right now, I think. Even though Dean Kramer beat the Yankees, everybody's excited.
Ryan Mountcastle, Keegan Aiken. There's some.
We better be this excited about the Ravens on Monday after they beat the Browns. It's like a regular sports week. I'm talking like a sports guy again.
I would hope Ravens fans are more excited than as much as the Orioles have been fun, and I'm optimistic about some things we're seeing for the future. Ravens, come on. We're talking about a Super Bowl contender, if not the favorite in many eyes. So,
do I need to break the purple rope lights out again here and do a week of radio?
I think
let's go 1-0 first.
I was going to say, wait on the lights. you gotta build. You gotta let this thing build. It's still early. This feels like it should be the first preseason.
Should I get on
game.
the airplane to Houston next week, wrapped in my purple lights? I don't know, to honor Bobby Nick.
Put some lights on your mask. How about that?
All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy. They inspired the whole community charity series that begat the crazy Baltimore positive concept that's about to take over all of our work here. So all of our WNST work will platform there. There's a WNST Classic. There's all sorts of incredible things to click on, including every word ever written by Luke Jones, if I can ever figure out how to make WordPress combine, Luke, but that's my nerddom. I am Nestor. He is Luke Jones. Together, we're covering the Ravens pretty much better than everybody because that's what we do around here. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Keeping it live, keeping it local, keeping it out on BaltimorePositive.com.